The reservation came through at 4:17, buried between linen counts and wine pairings. And for 2 seconds, I thought the resort had made a vendor mistake. My name sat in the courtesy contact line, clean and familiar, the way it appeared on private dinners I had spent years earning. Then I saw Grant Ellison listed as the primary guest, Blair Sutton as his companion, with a tasting schedule attached under the note, per Marin's usual arrangement. The room went quiet where my husband had used my name to make another woman feel expensive. I read the confirmation twice before touching anything, because one wrong click felt too generous. Ocean view room, private tasting, late checkout, and a vendor courtesy flag opened only when someone believed I had approved it. Blair was not a typo hiding in a system field. She had been typed beside my husband's name, while my name sat underneath them like a key left at the desk. My phone buzzed before I decided whether my hands were cold or just steady. Livia Hart, the operations manager for a team I trusted, did not soften what we were seeing. Marin, this is not a typo. Somebody used your name like a discount code. Her words landed harder because the proof had already said the same thing. For 1 second, I wanted a simpler wound, the kind where a husband lies and a wife catches him. This was uglier, because Grant had not just taken Blair somewhere beautiful. He had carried my reputation into the lobby and let her walk through a door I had built. I saved the email as a PDF, forwarded it to my private account, captured the metadata, and closed the laptop. Grant came in smelling like rain and mint gum, smiling like home would absorb anything. He kissed my cheek, set his keys in the bowl, and asked what we were doing for dinner. I looked at his wedding ring, then at the hand that had probably typed Blair's name beside his own. Something simple, I answered, because simple was all I trusted myself to say. Grant acted normal enough to make the house feel staged. He rinsed his coffee mug, complained about a supplier missing a delivery window, and asked whether I had remembered to schedule the tire rotation for my car. Nothing in his voice carried guilt, not even the courtesy of nervousness. He moved through our kitchen like a man who believed the walls had agreed to keep his secrets. At dinner, he mentioned a supplier retreat near the coast. Probably 2 nights, maybe 3 if meetings ran long. The lie came out smooth, folded between bites of salmon and a complaint about Portland traffic. I watched his hand reach for the salt, the same hand that had probably typed Blair Sutton into a reservation beside his own name. When he noticed my quiet, his smile tightened slightly. "You okay tonight?" I kept my fork still and answered, "I am listening better." Later, while he stood at the sink pretending to help, his watch lit against his wrist. I did not reach for it, did not lean closer, did not need to. The preview showed one line from Blair, sharp enough to cut through every soft thing left in the room. "Tell her it is work again." That was when the first email stopped being a mistake and became a pattern. I went upstairs before him and sat on the edge of the bed we still shared on paper. The room looked ordinary. His charger on the nightstand, my sweater folded over the chair, the framed photo from Cannon Beach still facing the door. Ordinary things can become evidence when the person beside them keeps lying. Grant came in smelling like toothpaste and easy confidence, kissed my shoulder, and murmured, "Long day?" I nodded once. Because if I opened my mouth, the truth might come out too early. When he fell asleep, I carried my laptop to the kitchen and opened the shared tablet we used for recipes and travel confirmations. The messages were not hidden well because Grant had never imagined I would stop trusting him before he finished using me. Blair knew my name, knew the resort language, knew the phrase "usual arrangement," and still told him not to let wife energy ruin the weekend. I opened my old project notebook and wrote 3 words at the top of a clean page: attorney, housing, reputation. Adrian Cole's office sat above a bakery in Southeast Portland, which made the whole thing feel almost insulting at first. Downstairs, people were buying coffee and almond croissants while I carried a folder that held the ugliest version of my marriage. Adrian did not offer outrage when I showed her the resort confirmation, the watch preview, and the messages from the shared tablet. She put on reading glasses, turned the pages slowly, and said, "Pain is real. Marin, but pain is not a filing strategy." That sentence should have offended me, but it steadied something I had been afraid to touch. Adrian explained Oregon divorce like a person who had watched too many emotional people accidentally weaken strong cases. Affairs mattered less than records, and humiliation mattered less than proof. What mattered were spending patterns, access, disclosure, property, and whether Grant had used anything connected to our household or my work reputation to support a life he was hiding. I slid the resort email across her desk again and pointed to the line that said, "Per Marin's usual arrangement." Adrian's expression changed only slightly, but her finger stopped on that sentence. This is the part that matters. He did not just lie at home. He carried your professional name into the lie. I looked at the page and finally understood why the email had hurt in such a clean, specific place. She told me not to call Blair, not to threaten Grant, not to post anything, and not to touch his personal property without documentation. If I wanted to protect myself, every step had to be boring enough for a court clerk and clean enough for a judge. Temporary orders could preserve accounts and access while the dissolution moved forward. Any personal belongings later moved out would need inventory, receipts, notice through counsel, and a destination tied to Grant himself. By the time I signed Adrian's engagement letter, I had stopped shaking. Not because the marriage felt less broken, but because the broken pieces finally had names. Confirmation, disclosure, access, notice, record. I left her office with the same folder under my arm, but it no longer felt like evidence against my sanity. It felt like the first thing in months that Grant had not been able to rewrite or soften later with another practiced smile again. The proof that Blair was not confused arrived before lunch. In a voicemail, the resort concierge sent to my old vendor line by mistake. I played it once standing at my kitchen counter, then again with Livia listening through the speaker. Blair's voice was light, practiced, almost bored, as she called herself Marin's family contact and asked whether the private tasting could be upgraded under my usual arrangement. She did not stumble over my name. She used it like she had been handed instructions. Livia stayed quiet until the voicemail ended, and that silence said more than comfort would have. Then she exhaled and gave me the truth clean. She knew exactly whose door she was opening. I looked at the phone in my hand, and the anger that came was colder than tears. If Blair had been lied to, she would not have known the vendor line, the courtesy phrase, or the right way to sound entitled without sounding desperate. That afternoon, I stopped trying to understand them and started correcting access. I sent one calm email to every vendor who still had my name tied to guest privileges, tasting requests, room holds, and private preview lists. From that moment forward, anything involving my name required confirmation from my work email only. Not from a spouse, not from a companion, not from anyone calling themselves family contact. I did not mention Grant. I did not mention Blair. The policy was clean enough to stand on its own, which made it harder for either of them to call it personal. By evening, Grant's first call came from the coast, his voice tight under a layer of fake patience. "Marin, did you change something with the vendors?" I pictured the resort desk asking him for direct authorization. Pictured Blair standing beside him while the door she borrowed quietly closed. "No," I answered. Keeping my hand flat on the counter, I corrected it. He tried to breathe through the pause like he still had control of the conversation. I heard movement behind him, then Blair's sharp whisper asking why the tasting had been downgraded. That small sound told me everything I needed. She had wanted the beautiful part of my life, but not the boundary that protected it. Adrian sent the notice through counsel 2 mornings after Grant stopped coming home. The address came from his own correspondence. The short-term apartment Blair Sutton had used for flowers. Resort confirmations. And the kind of deliveries people make when they believe a secret has become a plan. I was not allowed to throw his life onto a curb. And I did not want to. I wanted the record clean enough that even his lawyer would have to read it twice before finding nothing useful. The movers arrived at 9. Polite and careful, which made the whole morning feel stranger than anger would have. I stood in the hallway with an inventory sheet while they boxed Grant's suits. Golf shoes, coffee grinder, watches, old cookbooks, framed trail maps, and the chair he used for Sunday calls. Nothing was broken, hidden, or kept because Adrian had been clear. If I wanted him out of my house, I had to make it impossible for him to call my order emotional. By noon, every box had a label. Every label had a number, and every number matched a photo on my phone. I signed the moving receipt with a hand that did not shake, then watched the truck pull away with the belongings of a man who had treated home like a storage unit for his respectable life. The silence after it left was not peaceful yet, but it was honest. For the first time in weeks, nothing in my hallway belonged to a lie. Blair called before sunset, and I knew from the first breath that the truck had found her building. "You cannot just send him here," she snapped, with traffic and panic moving behind her. I looked at the delivery confirmation in my inbox and kept my voice flat. "I did not send him anywhere, Blair. I sent his belongings to the future he told people he wanted." For a second, she had no answer, and that pause was worth every careful receipt. Then she hissed that her landlord was angry, that boxes were blocking the hallway, that Grant had not explained anything. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the fantasy had finally arrived with tape on it. Later, Grant left one voicemail I did not return, and Blair left one for him that said, "I did not sign up to store your marriage," which told me she had known exactly what she was helping him carry. Portland did not need a post to understand what happened. In my corner of hospitality, people noticed quiet things first, like a revoked courtesy flag, a downgraded tasting, a name removed from a preferred guest note. Nobody needed me to write a confession for Grant or a warning about Blair. The system had already started telling the truth in the only language that Circle respected. Access denied. I kept working, answering emails with the same clean sentences I had always used. Every vendor who received my updated authorization rule understood exactly why a name had to come from my work address now. A few replied with nothing more than received, but the silence behind those replies had weight. In a business built on trust, boundaries were not drama. They were currency. Livia called 3 days later while I was sorting table proofs for a private dinner. She did not sound excited, only careful, which made the news land harder. Blair had lost a supper club client after the client heard she had called herself my family contact to upgrade a reservation. Nobody wants a curator who treats someone else's guest list like a ladder, Livia murmured, and I sat very still because the voicemail had finally grown legs. Grant tried to turn the story soft before it hardened around him. He told mutual contacts I had overreacted, that the resort mix-up had been awkward, that marriage stress made people misunderstand details. The problem was the details. My name was on the courtesy contact line. Blair's voice was on the concierge message, and Grant had no clean way to explain why his supplier retreat included a woman asking for my usual arrangement. By the end of that week, his company had moved him away from the premium accounts that depended on judgment. No announcement, no spectacle, just fewer invitations, colder replies, and one tasting room host who suddenly needed everything confirmed in writing. Blair stopped appearing on client threads where she used to float in with bright confidence. I did not have to raise my voice because every receipt had already done the talking. Then Grant texted, "Can we talk like adults?" I forwarded it to Adrian and closed the message. Adults did not borrow their wife's name to impress a woman who knew exactly what she was taking. Adults kept records, changed locks on access, and left the rest to consequences. Salem was only an hour from Portland, but the quiet felt like another country. I rented a small house with wide windows, a stubborn front step, and a kitchen that did not know Grant's coffee mug. The first night, I expected the silence to punish me. Instead, it held still long enough for me to hear myself breathe without waiting for a lie to walk through the door. I changed the emergency contact on every form before I unpacked my clothes. Livia's name replaced Grant's on my insurance portal, my work profile, and the membership records that had once made my life too easy for him to borrow. I bought a round table that seated 4, not because I needed the space, but because I refused to keep arranging meals around someone who no longer came home. By the end of the week, my house looked unfinished in a way that felt honest. Work came back slowly. Then, all at once, I stopped taking projects that depended on Portland favors and started accepting smaller rooms where my name had to stand on its own. Owen Price reached out about a supper club in Salem, and his message did not ask who I knew or which guest list I could open. He had read my proposal, marked 3 lines, and written, "I like that you build quiet into the room." I met him at the supper club on a rainy afternoon when the tables were still bare and the chairs were turned upside down. Owen was 36, calm without performing it, the kind of man who looked at a room before speaking inside it. He did not ask about Grant, or Blair, or why I had left Portland with half my life in sealed boxes. He only walked me through the space and said, "You do not have to explain why quiet matters here." That night, Adrian called while I was labeling linen samples on my living room floor. Grant had agreed to reimburse part of the expenses tied to the trip and the privileges he had used without permission. Not because he had become generous, but because the record left him very little room to sound innocent. I hung up, looked around the small house, and realized the sweetest part was not winning. It was needing less from the life that had tried to use me. Grant tried to return through the doors that used to open because my name was nearby. A private preview was happening in Portland, the kind of tasting room where hosts once smiled when he arrived. He gave his name and waited for the room to remember him. The host checked the list twice and kept his voice polite. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. I don't have authorization for you tonight." He texted me first, then emailed, then called a number that no longer reached my life. My old work reply sent him the contact policy, not my new address, and that felt cleaner than any argument. When he tried Livia, she did not soften it. "She is not your access point anymore." I heard about it later, through quiet channels that carried every fact without needing a post. By then, Blair had stopped appearing on client threads, and Grant's company had moved him away from accounts that required trust. Nobody shouted at him. Nobody needed to. He was simply treated like a man whose judgment had become too expensive to risk. That same night, I stood inside Owen Price's supper club in Salem while guests read my name printed on the menu card as the experience designer. Not Mrs. Ellison. Not courtesy contact. Not someone's useful wife. Marin Whitlock, written cleanly where it belonged. Owen handed me leftovers after the last guest left and said, "You built a room people wanted to stay inside." Grant sent a long apology the next morning, and I read it after coffee. Not before. He did not blame Blair this time, or stress, or the marriage. And maybe that mattered somewhere behind me. I closed the message, locked my small Salem house, and drove to work without rehearsing one answer for him. Peace had become a place I could enter without permission. If this story felt familiar, remember this: peace is not something you beg someone to give back. Sometimes you build it quietly, one clean decision at a time. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more stories. And choose the life that finally lets you breathe.